Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we continue to discuss the various developments, both here in Israel as well as throughout the region and beyond, it's always important to remember how this war started. 201 days ago, the Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 246 people, including elderly men, women, children, and infants. 133 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. Let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, if we may initially focus on the Gaza Strip, absent an arrangement, a cessation of hostilities in exchange for the release of the remaining hostages in Hamas captivity, Israel is preparing for its offensive into the border town of Rafah.
So, Jonathan, for the uninitiated, it could be somewhat confusing because Israel has two active fronts right now. The southern one, the Gaza Strip, where fighting resumed in the northern district, Beit Lahiya and the vicinity of Gaza City, and the northern one, where fighting is mostly in the southern district of South Lebanon. So it's the north in the south and the south in the north. What the IDF found overnight is that in the humanitarian space set out for the civilian population, rocket launches has been prepared in order to shoot at Israeli civilian population centers again. And of course, that means that Hamas, this is no big news, does not respect any rules of any game. It is working while violating all norms, all rules of any conduct. And even while Israel was prevailed upon to take account of the 1.4 million civilians in the Rafah area and make way for them, once the military operation starts, Hamas is exploiting the very arrangements made for these civilians in order to once again fight from amongst the population. So this is in the Rafah area, strikes from the air before the ground operation begins, which supposedly will not happen this week, the latter days of the Passover feast, but shortly thereafter, once Israel coordinates this action with both Washington and Cairo, if it is possible to get an agreement or acquiescence at least for that. There is also fighting in the central corridor, which starts at Kibbutz Be'eri, one of the victims of the massacre, and goes all the way to the sea, all the way meaning 10 kilometers or so. It's not a very long corridor. And in the north, again, dozens of projectiles shot into Israel, and the Israeli Air Force not only responding in kind, and sometimes destroying the squad, the launching squad, moments after it has acted, but also working diligently to degrade the assets which Hezbollah has been saving for a full-scale war.
Turning now to the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish. General Gavish, it's good to see you. I'd like to immediately dive into prospects of a looming offensive into the border town of Rafah, bordering, of course, Egypt. From what I hear from very senior practitioners here in Israel, is that Egypt already agreed to the terms set by Israel with regard to its offensive in Rafah. And right now, the only constraints are emanating out of Washington. Nevertheless, their resolve here in Jerusalem to execute this plan, to eradicate the Islamist Hamas, is unwavering, and Washington now, with Hamas's rejection of any arrangement for cessation of hostilities in exchange for hostage release, is warming up to the idea of an Israeli offensive and understanding that it is inevitable to bring about the demise of the Islamist Hamas, at least from a military perspective and a governing capability perspective.
Well, indeed, Jonathan, going into Rafah, this is something that was stated by the IDF for quite a long time, also by the Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, and our government, that this should be the next phase of this war. So it shouldn't be a surprise that the IDF is preparing himself to this plan. It's been a while that this is what is being done. Of course, no one is going to declare when and how, but this is something which the IDF was preparing for it quite a while. There is the complexity, of course, of civilians, quite a large number of civilians that are in this area, and of course, this is something that needs to be considered. I would like also to echo what was just mentioned by Amir, which is very important, that again and again we see that the Hamas doesn't have any rules of engagement which are correlated to any humanitarian laws or UN laws or whatever. They did it again in the last 48 hours, and the IDF had to react accordingly. And they were preparing to shoot rockets from those humanitarian areas. So this is exactly the complexity that we see in this area, that from one side, you do want to take care of those civilians in order that they won't be harmed if there would be an attack there, but then you see that the Hamas is working and preparing himself among them. And of course, this cannot be done without cooperation of those civilians. So very complex situation in the Rafah area. And once again, this is something that the IDF is being preparing for quite a long time.
Let's now turn to London in the United Kingdom, where we're joined by a former senior director at the National Security Council for Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, as well as a U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, among others, the founding director of the American Center for Levant Studies, retired Colonel Joel Raburn. It's good to see you, Colonel. I'd like to ask you, from an American perspective, looking towards the Rafah offensive, the expected offensive, of course, what are the hurdles and what are we to expect from an international perspective looking into this war zone, and to what degree do the various forces in Washington back such an effort, since we do hear both sides of the aisle supporting, but also both sides of the aisle, there are voices that object to such an offensive?
Jonathan, well, in military assistance terms between the United States and Israel, it was really important. It was an important signal that last night the U.S. Senate passed the package of aid for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan. That's going to be signed into law by President Biden today, probably, which I think opens which ends the logjam on security assistance. Which will take it, which I think it'll diffuse the political tension in Congress for a little while about that assistance. What you're actually seeing on the U.S. side, I think that's more concerning, is that the entire Gaza campaign has become a domestic U.S. political issue, and it's playing out with some on college campuses and so on. That sort of tension is increasing, and I suspect then that there will be, if the Rafah operation goes ahead, that there will be a lot of the anti-Israeli, pro-Palestinian cause groups in the United States that are just primed to explode, uh, uh, so to speak. I think you'll see a real intensification of those efforts, and that'll be happening in an election season in the United States. It'll become a sharp political issue, and that's probably going to guide the Biden administration's approach to the Rafah operation, just as it has been doing for the entire Gaza war so far. I expect that to intensify. So there will be it's driven by U.S. domestic political concerns at this point, which is unfortunate.
Mr. Owen, liberty comes at a cost of sacrifice, and Israel has sacrificed a lot in order to ensure that Hamas would be degraded to a point of no return. Nevertheless, in order to reach such a calculus, you are forced, from a military perspective, to eradicate the remaining 4 battalions, and then the military term of Dalan, or one of those terms, to basically ensure that Hamas, which would then break out into various splinter cells of terror, will not be able to regain control, and there would be a potential alternative once a policy or coherent policy here in Jerusalem with regard to the day after is implemented. How do you see that being translated to the West at a time when disinformation is rampant, not only with regard to the election in the United States and the various masses of students who are very prone to disinformation spouted by various totalitarian regime-owned networks, including Al Jazeera and others, that have been very instrumental in trying to misinform the populations who are seeking some sort of understanding with regard to the region, but are failing to do so?
So basically, there are 3 options for a form of post-Hamas government in Gaza. One is an Israeli military occupation. Israel doesn't want it. It doesn't want its soldiers to become targets for terrorists. And the United States and the Arab countries do not want it, so we can rule that out. The other 2 options are to have some form of an inter-Arab or international interim force. We remember that UNIFIL in Lebanon has been interim for the last 46 years. So interim in the Middle East has a strange connotation. But nevertheless, either that, or if Israel keeps resisting that, there will be a vacuum, anarchy. But in all of these options, Israel must keep its freedom of action regarding the buildup and the restoration of Hamas forces. Now, perhaps the population would still heed the call of Hamas leaders to obey their guidance. But if Hamas tries to reconstitute its defense industry, to build its arsenal once again in order to launch rockets into Israel, Israel should do what it has refrained from doing ever since Hamas took over Gaza by force in 2007. And that is each time, even the smallest shop is found where pipes are being welded into rockets to hit it and destroy it. If Israel maintains such a policy, then what you talked about regarding eradicating, eliminating, this cannot be once and for all. It's a constant battle. Then it is feasible.
General Kavish, let's turn our attention now to the north. The Iranian proxy Hezbollah has been launching cross-border projectiles for the last 48 hours in intensifying spectrum. Is that truly so, according to the various reports, or are we seeing more of the same and the low-intensity war is expected to continue, irrespective of the rhetoric coming out of Beirut, in which Hezbollah has indicated that it may expand its military aggression against Israel if Israel does not stop eradicating or degrading its military infrastructure in the border region within the two lines specified within UN Security Council Resolution 1701 as no terror zones.
Well, indeed, Jonathan, first it is, I think, important to highlight that it is not only that Israel is reacting to what Hezbollah is doing. Israel is also mainly in the areas which are close to the border is undermining the capabilities of the Hezbollah, and this is something that is going on for months already. I don't think that there is something really different from what we see from the Hamas. We saw this kind of side, along the last few months. There were few days that the amount of rockets were high, some UAVs, and then it went again low. And the question is really to see what is being exactly attacked. Are they changing the equation? Let's put it this way. And this is not the case. The Hezbollah is still keeping the same, let's say, strategy of what is he shooting against, at least declaring to what he's shooting against. And we also have to say that although they send quite a lot of projectiles, the vast majority of them, those that were targeted into areas that we wanted to defend them, were intercepted by the Israeli forces, and there was not real harm. There was also two UAVs that were intercepted over the water. So I think that overall it's more rhetoric than something which is practically being done by the Hezbollah. But this is on the short term. In the midterm and for the long term, we all understand that the situation in the northern part of Israel, we would have to find a solution to it. We cannot continue living like this. We have to remember that 60 or more thousands of Israelis are refugees in their own country. They evacuated their homes on those cities and towns close to the northern border. They need to go back, and they would be able to go back only if they would be safe. And this is something that the IDF and Israel as a nation, this is still something that we would have to take care of on our northern border.
Colonel Raburn, you held the Lebanon file at the National Security Council in the past, and you know quite well the landscape and the intricacies within that country. Is it safe to say that Lebanon is pretty much a forward base of the Islamic Republic of Iran? And to what degree did the latest amendments or resolutions passed at the Senate really complement the necessity of Israel, of the United States, to try and push back on this Iranian influence?
Yes, I think for quite some time, I think the better way to say it is that the Revolutionary Guards have freedom of action, freedom of movement in Lebanon, and therefore they've been able to set up direct and proxy outposts that they can use to threaten Israel. So and I think obviously in a strategic sense, Hezbollah takes its direction from the supreme leader via the Revolutionary Guards, and so yes, I think you can consider in my mind as a military analyst, I've always considered Hezbollah's forces to be an extension of the Revolutionary Guards under their operational control, strategic direction in Lebanon, and therefore the southern border of Lebanon is really a border between Israel and the IRGC. Not the Lebanese state. The dynamic in Beirut right now that has been you have a political impasse which is preventing the formation of a fully authoritative government and a president. Lebanon has no president right now. It has no it has only a caretaker prime minister who has limited authorities. So the political deadlock so far has been tied to the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel. And so on the Hezbollah and Iran and Bashar al-Assad side, it's in their interest to try to link the 1701 question with the internal political deadlock, because what they want is to seat a pro-Hezbollah government and use it and dangle some sort of agreement over the implementation of 1701 as a way to entrench a pro-Hezbollah government, including, for example, probably with Suleiman Frangia as the president. That's who they want because he's so close to Bashar al-Assad and to Hezbollah. It would be an extension of their control. What the United States and France have been trying to do is try to mobilize the rest of the political factions in Lebanon to decouple, to disconnect the 1701 issue from the political deadlock so that they can move ahead with seating a new president and forming a new government without having to wait for Hezbollah, Iran, Assad to acquiesce to some sort of formula in the south, which they're probably not going to do anyway. As someone who's watched Lebanon for a long time, I don't have any confidence. I'm deeply skeptical that kind of disconnecting has been done. However, I will say that what happened on the night of April 13th, 14th will have a positive political effect in Lebanon, because the big question concerning a potential confrontation between Hezbollah and the IRGC in the north and Israel was how much damage could Hezbollah do in the first or in the early salvos of that kind of confrontation before being overwhelmed by Israeli air power, for example? Could a lot of the rockets and missiles, it's a vast rocket and missile arsenal that Hezbollah has, could it get through Israeli defenses to do real damage before Israel has a chance to go and destroy all these emplacements? I think if you're a Hezbollah and Revolutionary Guards military strategist now, you have to really be wondering where if you get into a fist fight, a punching fight with Israel, can you survive? Can you deliver a first punch and a second punch without those being blocked and doing no damage before you yourself are overwhelmed by Israel's air superiority? Because there's no real air defense in Lebanon once the Israeli forces really decide to take it on. So that will have a knock-on effect with the political dynamics in Beirut if there are skillful Western diplomats who can take advantage of it.
We're drawing near to the end of today's update, and I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to have a little bit of focused insight, and therefore, Mr. Owen, I'd like to start with you. We're looking now at a situation where Israel is also focusing on the Syrian front, potentially also eastward, to try and identify the various trends which Iran is pursuing in its quest to basically eradicate the Jewish state. What can you tell us about that, and what should we focus on for the near future?
Well, the common denominator of the two active fronts is that Israel is now leading or being part of two simultaneous wars of attrition, one in Gaza and one in Lebanon. And the fight is over stamina. Which of the sides can, for the longer haul, keep its equilibrium, maintain the momentum, even if it is lower level. This is not grand maneuvers by armor and infantry, mostly. And in that regard, what Joel Raburn referred to earlier, the aid package passed by the US Congress and signed into law by President Biden is a very important signal, not only symbolic, but very substantial, because Israel will now be able to replenish It's fighter aircraft and missiles and bombs and shells, and be ready for not only the continuation of these two fights, but also their extension to further fronts.
We lost connection with General Gavi, so I'd like to turn to Colonel Raburn. Mr. Owen just mentioned specifically the Senate passing the bipartisan, if I may, amendments to which were brought, of course, from Congress. What can you tell us about that, and what should we expect in the near future with the expanded support of the U.S. people presented in those amendments?
Since the Biden administration took office, they've been laying the groundwork for a potential return to some sort of nuclear agreement or a broader agreement on sanctions relief with the Iranian regime, and it's never been clear that Congress would go along with that. There are specific things that that a White House would need to have in order to do an executive agreement, not a treaty, with the Iranian regime on its nuclear program or anything else that resulted in sanctions relief. There are specific sanctions waiver authorities that Congress has given to the executive branch over the years. But if a majority in Congress in both houses chooses to revoke those waivers, then there's no sanctions relief that a White House can offer to the Iranian regime. And I think the legislation last night indicates that that's where the Congress is headed. That if the Biden administration between now and the U.S. election were to seek to try to go back into some sort of sanctions relief agreement with the Iranian regime, that there's now a clear majority in Congress that would take action against that, revoking those waivers and making it impossible. And I think the Iranians are smart enough that they can see that as well. So it was a pretty significant thing that the Congress passed the Massa Act last night in terms of the geopolitical dynamics here.
Absolutely. Well, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Colonel Raburn, General Gavish in absentia, and Mr. Owen, of course, for your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel, and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.